He was only in power for 4 years. But in that 4 years, and that's part of the reason why I was convinced that I want to do my PhD on Thomas Sankara. Just for 4 years, I argue that he achieved in the 4 years more than what most African leaders have achieved in the last 60 years of post-colonial independence. Sankara was, we can call him a feminist in modern day terminology. That term wasn't too used at the time, yes, in the 80s, in the 70s. But he was, because of his works, he was of the view that women don't need to be liberated. They have to liberate themselves. What they had to do as a government at the time was to ensure that they give them the tools, they give them the platform to express themselves, because no one can rescue you, right? So he was well aware that, especially him as a man, that he wouldn't fully understand women's struggles. And then he tells everyone to, guys, just calm down. I'm going outside. I know they're here for me. So rather they take me out than take you guys out too. So he goes out and then walks to the door with his hands up. And then nothing, no conversation, and then they mowed his body with bullets.
In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or position of this channel, its hosts, or affiliates. This podcast is a platform for open discussions and exploration of various perspectives, including controversial and unconventional ideas. We encourage viewers to think critically, do their own research, and form their own opinions. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as fact, advice, or an endorsement of any specific viewpoint. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Umoya Ulight, Umoya Upright. Welcome to another episode of MOYA Political Series, where we endeavor to make sure that you're going to get the education that you're not getting at the Mlungu schools. Thank you so much to everybody who's liking, sharing, and subscribing. We appreciate you. To everybody keeping the lights on as members, we really, really, really appreciate you. Thank you guys for watching all the adverts to the end, because that's how you contribute financially to the channel. As usual, I've got a great teacher for us. I've got an African researcher and an academic, these intellectuals, Dr. Moorosi Leshoele. Did I get it?
You got it this time around.
Thank you. You know the class at Swanda Sutu. I'm always like, oh my God, what's going on? But Siyabulela kakhulu. And thank you for your time. And we look forward to having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here. And I absolutely love your intro, especially the part where you say you hear things that you never had in school, that Abelungu didn't teach you.
Yes.
And that's where you actually learn the most too.
Deliberately so, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So, in our generation, the work that you do is very important because so much has been erased. And those of us who still carry the knowledge of the past have got a responsibility to the future to kind of be that link. And today we decided to speak about Burkina Faso, about Thomas Sankara, about Traoré. So let's unpack it. I mean, can you give us, because a lot of people don't actually know about ECOUS. A lot of people don't know about that region. Yeah. We just know Burkina Faso, Traoré. Right. So maybe if you give us the background of that area.
Sure. So Burkina Faso, basically, as you rightly said, it's in West Africa. Used to be a member of the ECOUS, Regional Economic Community. ECOUS, for those who might not be familiar with that economic community, it's an economic community for West African states. And essentially just like SADC, East African Community, and the other. I think there are a total of about 8, what we call them RECs, regional economic communities. So the idea essentially behind those were to sort of ensure that those regions cooperate better, work together, and the like. And so, but Burkina Faso is a very small country. I think it's surrounded by about 6 or so other countries, the likes of Ivory Coast, Senegal, Mali, Ghana as well, a number of them. So it's a very small player in that region, very small country, not so rich in a lot of things except gold. And for the most part, a lot of its people would immigrate to Senegal or Ivory Coast to work there and send remittances back home. So it used to be a very small player until 4 August 1983, when Sankara showed up in the scene, and yeah, it got to be better known after that.
That's why we're here. So give us what happened in 1983? How does Sankara ascend?
Yeah.
We are listeners here. We don't really interview. We just listen.
Is it?
Yes.
So perhaps if you don't mind, just to backtrack a bit to tell you how I got to know about Sankara first.
Yes.
It might be fascinating to know that the first time I heard of Thomas Sankara and a bit of his works was from Andile Mkitama. I think at the time he was still leading SNI, September National Imbizo.
Yes.
And I was doing my undergrad at the time. This must have been 2008-9, thereabouts, in Cape Town at UCT. And I was doing political science and psychology for my undergrad. And I was wondering, I'm only learning about Sankara, I think, in my second year or so. These are the stuff that should have been taught in political science, which is why I find that line of yours very fascinating about the things you didn't learn from Lungu schools. Because I learned that from Kitama. And I found him very fascinating. And I was wondering, this is interesting. Fast forward, of course, I started researching about him. Fast forward, I then decided to do my PhD on Thomas Sankara, where I wanted to dig a bit deeper, beyond the superficial, beyond what you see on TV or in the media. And so Thomas Sankara, I guess, to get back to your question without digressing much, Sankara was born in Burkina Faso in a small town called Yako. So this was in December 1949, right? So he grew up just like any other kid, but very smart, very clear, even in primary school, in high school. He did very well in his school, in his studies. And but I guess he was rebellious, like many of them, quite rebellious. And an interesting anecdote is that as they were growing up, of course, as you might be aware, Burkina Faso was colonized by the French, right? So just like in many parts of the continent, you'd have French, people living there and their kids in elite schools and nice areas. So Sankara had a bit of contact with those children because his father was a police officer, right, of the colonial government at the time. So he'd mingle a bit with the kids there. And he didn't have a bicycle. One of the white kids had a bicycle. And they would yen, being on top of that bicycle and riding the bicycle. Until eventually he decided, snap that, I'm going to snatch the bicycle and ride it. And that got his father in a lot of trouble. So I guess those are small nuggets that show you that, he had that fighting spirit already, even as a kid. And so fast forward, he goes to high school, does well in his matric, well, what we call matric, and then gets a scholarship to go to the military school, which was a very rare opportunity at the time. He aces, his training. Immediately after that, he gets a scholarship. I think must have been around 1975 thereabouts. He gets another scholarship to go to Madagascar, our neighboring country here, which is up in flames. The young people are fighting there. So he went there for parachute training. It was meant to be 3 years or 2. Ended up spending 4 years because he was fascinated about how they were doing things there, and how the military was playing a very crucial role in ensuring that they not only sit in the barracks and get paid, they were actually involved in like your basic socio-economic issues like building of schools, hospitals. So he got fascinated by that model until he saw the Malagasy rebellion, where the young people were fighting the then government. They actually toppled the government. And I guess that's where the whole revolution thing got sparked. And eventually he went back home. But before going back home, he got another scholarship to go to Paris for some training for about a year or so. Then he came back home. And then, of course, he was a soldier and he started managing some of the units there. So as a soldier, obviously, he got in the unit that he was in charge of. He started teaching them not just how to fight with guns, but how to fight with their brains as well, in the sense that he started politically conscientizing them, making them read proper literature. As you know, I might be forgetting the actual phrase, but it's one of the famous Sankara's quotations where he says that a soldier without political or ideological training is a potential criminal, right? So he was avoiding that, that, these are just robots with guns, but they need to think.
Where does he get his consciousness? Because he's in his early 20s now, right?
At the time, he's in his, let's say, mid-20s, thereabouts.
Okay.
Because he was 33 when he became president. A lot of literature out there often says he was 34, but it's not too accurate. But I guess we, as academics, we pay attention to small detail nuances. So he was 33 because it was just, I think, about 2 or 3 months before he took power, before it would be his birthday. So essentially, he was 33 years old when he took power. And so it's fascinating, as you say, very young at that age. He already thinks like that. And he tries to instill this, that kind of thinking even in older people that he found there, and he led the team. But I guess to answer your question as to where did he get the consciousness, he read a lot of Marxism, a lot of Lenin. So he was very, very curious. He had a very curious mind. So yes,
you were saying, so now he's teaching, he's conscientizing the soldiers, and then?
Yes. So as you say, this must have been in his mid-20s, thereabouts. Fast forward, when he was actually 29 or 30, he got invited by the then Prime Minister for him to be Minister of Information. So that was in 1981, right? So around that time, we can do the math, but surely he was around 29 or 30 when he was Minister of Information. I think he did that role for about 6 months. In 1983, January, he again gets appointed, this time around as Prime Minister, right? Or second vice president or something like that. Because as you know, some countries would have a president and then they would have a prime minister, something to that effect. So he was just second in command, essentially. So that was in January 1983, gets appointed, because already his name was starting to, to make waves in the country, his Pan-Africanist ideals and his anti-imperialism ideals. And so he gets appointed, and I think he served again in that role for just a few months, until 1983, 4 August, which is, as I said, it's a very seminal, very important date, because that's when they then launched with Blaise Compaore, his erstwhile friend and brother. They then launched what some refer to as a coup against the government, right? The same government that appointed him to be prime minister, because things were going from bad to worse. But before the launch of that, and I'm saying so-called coup, and I'll explain why I say, because I don't regard it as a coup. So, but before the 4th of August, he was detained, house arrested, because France told the president to say, no, this guy, I don't like him, because obviously he was starting to do trips around the world to go to meetings, and he would spit fire. So a call came, no, this guy just shut his mouth, do something about him, and then he got house arrested. I think for a few weeks or so, and then Blaise Compaore, who was his close friend, then decided, let's take over this government, and then they launched the coup. and it was successful. Sankara didn't want to be president. Actually, he was nominated to be president. Remember, he's in house arrest when the coup is launched. So perhaps before I forget, let me then explain why I argue that what happened in that moment, which is what I also argue now with the current coups that have been happening, like 2020, 2021, thereabouts, the coup wave that has been happening in the Sahel, in West Africa specifically. I argue that those are not your typical selfish coups, for lack of a better word. And I recently wrote a chapter in my book where I make a case to say perhaps these so-called coups are a cry for genuine decoloniality. Perhaps they're not coups necessarily. And so I'm saying that the 4 August moment wasn't necessarily a coup because it had popular support across sectors. So trade unions, students, civil servants, peasants supported that, and actually helped the military take over government because as the tanks were rolling, the people were cutting off, switching off electricity, barricading the roads, your normal people. So that shows you really that it had a buy-in from the people themselves. So Sankara gets elected and immediately charts a new path to Burkina Faso. And one of the first things he did, as you know, just a year into him being in power, so when they celebrated their first anniversary the following year, so this would have been 1984, 4 August, during his speech at the time, he then announced that we are moving away from the colonial name, Upper
Delta.
Hota Volta in French, Hota Volta, something like that, or Upper Volta in English.
Yeah.
Then they moved from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. And that wasn't just a symbolic name change. And I often argue, in our case in South Africa, when people say, but why are you changing names of roads, of airports and the like, to say it's not just symbolic gesture. We are reclaiming our identity. Because when colonizers came here, the first thing they did is they changed the names, right? A very fascinating example is in Zimbabwe, what is now known as what's that waterfall? Queen Victoria. Vic Falls, right? Vic Falls' actual name was Musiwa Tuli, right? But they changed that. Why did they change the name? So naming is very important. It's crucially important. People like Kwesi Kwapra, Gogiwa Tiongo make a solid case and argument to say we need to name our structures and people. We need to name our gods, for instance. So he changes the name in just 1 year of him being in power. I'm sure you're familiar with the debates about South Africa / Azania about the name change. It's been over 3 decades and it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. Sankara did that in 12 months. So he changes the name. Of course, it means the land of free men or upright men.
Upright men, yes.
And it was important that it's an indigenous name. So it comes from 2 languages, from the Maori and Fulfuli. So he merged the 2, and it wasn't just a simple exercise. The merging of the 2 different languages was also for him to show the people that forget about your ethnicities. We are black people, we are Africans, let's be together. So that was very powerful, thinking behind the name. So he's in charge, and he's pushing. Remember, he was only in power for 4 years. But in that 4 years, and that's part of the reason why I was convinced that I want to do my PhD on Thomas Sankara. Just for 4 years, I argue that he achieved in the 4 years more than what most African leaders have achieved in the last 60 years of post-colonial independence. And I was trying to figure out and make sense to say, what exactly did he do? And I guess that's why we're here. We're going to share what some of those achievements, failures, so that we don't just idolize him, critique him, so that some can learn. Hopefully, people like Ibrahim Traoré can learn to avoid some of the pitfalls that Sankara faced.
So get us into them. What makes Thomas Sankara himself? Why is he special? Why is he standing out?
Right, and actually make an argument that I think he stands shoulder to shoulder if not slightly higher, with our African giants, your Kwame Nkrumahs, Patrice Lumumba, Sobukwes, and Steve Biko's and them. And I make that case because, one, he was in government just for 4 years, right? But not only was he in government, he literally changed the face of Burkina Faso in that short period of time. But I guess let's do it chronologically so that we see what happened in the first year, second year, third year, and the fourth year. So amongst others, in the first year when he came in, he essentially decided that, and I think that was a decision he took in less than a month or so after he was in government, to sell off all government cars, luxurious Mercedes-Benzes, your Lexuses and them. He sold everything for the cheapest car in town at the time, and it was a Renault 5, right? So I don't know what a Renault 5 would be comparable to now. It's not even a Polo.
A
Polo,
Kia.
probably a Kia.
Yeah.
You know those smaller Nyana cars when you're parking, and you don't realize there's a car there. So essentially, the Renault 5 was an official government car, and the monies that were saved from selling off those luxurious cars were then used better to invest in education, in health, and in other important sectors. And so after doing that, and another interesting anecdote, actually talking about the Renault 5 as an official car, one of his ministers at the time, who actually I got to interview, because I was in Burkina Faso for, I think, 2 weeks collecting data. I got to go, I was very fortunate to have been in his house where he stays. It's literally an RDP house.
Sure.
I met his sister, his brother. It was a very surreal moment, right? So one of the ministers says about the car issue, the Renault 5, to say that not only did he give them that small car, the ministers, but he said they should drive themselves, no more chauffeurs. Right, so you can imagine how drastic that is. Beyond driving themselves, no more pegs and food for ministers. So what he did one of the days when they were having lunch, he invited a few of his ministers. They went to the market, got some food under a tree, and as they were eating, he then took out money from his pocket, paid for his plate, and then the colleagues were thinking, but I thought we were going to be spoiled. So they had to pay, everyone had to foot their bill. There's no free lunch, right? So he do those small acts. So as I was saying, the first act was to sell off the fleet. But secondly, he then decided that agriculture would form a bedrock of the economy. And he invested about 70% of the national budget went to strictly to agriculture. Because remember, this is a small arid country. They rely heavily, like most poor African states, they rely on agriculture. So they invested heavily on that, because previously with the colonial, colonial regimes and the puppet governments, they would export things like non-edible foods. Right? So they would export cotton, for instance, and get a bit of peanuts for that. But there are people who starve, so they wouldn't plant maize, sorghum, and the like. So he reversed that trajectory, because he famously often likes to say that he who feeds you controls you. So he wanted to ensure that he feeds his own people so they don't fed from elsewhere and they avoid being controlled from elsewhere. So he invested heavily in agriculture. And so the third year also, he then decided that he was no longer going to take any funds from the IMF, from the World Bank. Remember that phrase, he who feeds you controls you. Because once they do that, then they'll control the narrative and the shape of your foreign policy. And of course, he then introduced what we now term endogenous economic development strategy, where everything you do internally yourself from your people. You put in resources together. So this whole notion of foreign investment trickling in, and he knew that was a scam, that was a trap, and so they had to pull in their resources. And an interesting example of that was where they wanted to build a railway railway tracks for about, it was supposed to be 600 kilometers. And of course, they didn't have enough funds. I think they tried to get a bit of funds from the international financiers. They refused because of his rhetoric, right? His anti-imperialism rhetoric. So then decided, you know what, we'll do this thing ourselves internally. So what was supposed to happen was every village where the railway was going to pass had to build at least 1 kilometer just by their village there. The next village does the same thing. And they built the railway with their bare hands, literally. And in no time, they were able to build 100 kilometers of railway. Unfortunately, he was then killed in 1987. But the fact that they built 100 kilometers of railway with bare hands, without a cent from so-called foreign investors, I think was something remarkable, something our current governments can learn from. Because if we every time go to the World Bank, to the IMF, to plead for funds, as South Africa is doing now, then essentially it means we are captured. So that was one interesting aspect, but they tightened the belt on many different fronts. Amongst others, probably the most well known is the fact that when he took over government, I remember he was a soldier, he was captain, rank of captain in the army. When he became president, he then didn't increase his salary so that it's a presidential salary. He earned exactly the same amount that he earned as a captain, so he didn't increase his salary. And he had a rule that all his ministers would earn salaries that are commensurate to their qualification. So by that, it means that if you happen to be, let's say, Minister of Education, right, who was our minister for a very long time. So let's say you're Minister of your main Jimoseha, for instance, but your qualification is that of a nurse, or a pharmacist, or of a plumber, for instance, right? Your salary as a Minister of Education, if nurses say get paid 10,000 a month, you're going to get 10,000 as a minister. So your money wasn't determined by by you being
the position,
by a position. Yeah, exactly. The amount that you earned was determined by your qualification, right? So if you're a software engineer and then you became minister, then you'd earn obviously that much. And that way, ultimately, what ended up happening was that the budget that used to go to the civil servants across board, which was about 40% of the national fiscus, so almost half of their money used to pay civil servants. They essentially ended up, I think, spending only 10% or so from 40% of their fiscus on paying civil servants.
Sure.
And one of the strategies they also used for that was that the ministers and high-ranking officials had to forfeit at least for 1 month, a 1 month salary, and that money would be channeled to other developmental projects. And lower-ranking officials would forfeit half a month's salary per year, and then the money should be channeled in that way. And I think this one is probably, I guess, one of my favorites. So one of the interventions that he did to tighten the belt and to ensure that the whole idea of endogenous economic development actually works without needing money from outside, is that when they would travel, let's say to New York, to the what's this thing, UN headquarters, for instance, or in Switzerland. So if they were when they travel there, they would use a normal flight, the all-fly economy, because he would famously say that why should we be first class? Because when the plane takes off, everyone takes off. But when it lands, we're going to get there exactly the same time. So why waste money on first class when we would get there at the same time? So when they would get to these meetings, let's say it's a week-long meeting, they wouldn't use the people's resources to book themselves into beautiful hotels. Guess where they would sleep? So they get to New York, right, for this UN summit. So instead of them booking into a hotel, they would all go to the embassy of Burkina Faso and crash there. And of course, if it's a big delegation, there wouldn't be enough rooms to go around, right? Because there's supposed to be one person leaving the ambassador. So if there are not enough rooms, or beds, they would then buy mattresses and everyone would sleep on the floor. And they would spend a cent on that trip. That's how serious he was about saving the fiscals of the country so that they are better deployed elsewhere where they are most needed. So it makes you think that when our governments, our African governments often say, we don't have funds, there's no money, there's plenty of money, it's about the priorities. How do you use your money? How do you use your funds? So essentially, he'd make them sleep on the floor, including himself, and buy mattresses, go to meetings, and then come back, and then fly back home, and then get to work.
Wow.
So that was quite drastic. Another even drastic one was that he didn't want aircons installed. Remember, it's flipping hot in Burkina Faso, in West Africa. Temperatures go well over 40 degrees Celsius, right? It's burning. Like when you get off the jet, you get to the airport, you can literally feel the heat on your face. So he didn't want aircons in his office because he says, I'm no different from your normal Burkinabe person in the streets. I need to feel the pinch as well as I work so that I don't forget why I'm here. So how many Burkinabes have aircons in their houses? So why are you installing that in my office? So he didn't want an aircon in his office. so I guess that's an interesting example of someone who not only preached about being for the people, about our people, as comrades call them. He felt what his people felt. He wanted to feel that, so that he's not aloof. There's no gap between the ruled and the rulers.
Shastas, our government officials would freaking die if they had to sleep kapokadi matras.
I know, right?
And as if they didn't grow up living like that.
Exactly. That's the thing. So I mean, I often think if only we could attempt just 10%, 5% of what Sankara did in the 4 years, in the short 4 years he was president, if only we can attempt 5% of some of his interventions and ideas in our countries, now would achieve so much. So much.
So now, let's talk about, because we've spoken about Sankara, what you've told us has told us about this relationship with his people.
Sure.
Sankara as a feminist.
Right? This is interesting. I guess it's telepathy, perhaps not, because we both here. that was my next point that I wanted to talk about, actually. So it's as if you were reading my mind. So Sankara was, we can call him a feminist in modern day terminology. That term wasn't too used at the time, in the 80s, in the 70s. But he was, because of his works, right? And that's partly why I brought this book, and I'm going to read an extract. I should probably do that while we're on the topic of his thinking around women and their empowerment and their emancipation and their liberation. So, amongst others, Sankara, and at the time it wasn't fashionable for women to be given responsibilities to lead in government, even in the military. It was very uncommon. But he actually gave them a number of ministerial positions. And when I was in Burkina Faso, I met, what's her name again? I'll remember her name. She was in the cabinet of Sankara. She's still alive. She also got a serious position in Sankara's government. I think she was the governor or the finance something in his government. So not only did he do that, which was not fashionable at the time, but I think what's most remarkable is that he was of the view that women don't need to be liberated. They have to liberate themselves. What they had to do as a government at the time was to ensure that they give them the tools, they give them the platform to express themselves, because no one can rescue you, right? So he was well aware that, especially him as a man, that he wouldn't fully understand women's struggles, but what he had to do is, at least where he could, advocate for that, but beyond advocating, ensure that the policies they enact are pro-women, they ensure that women actually are seen as equals in society. So another, I think, famous line of Sankara quote is that the freeing of women, or the emancipation of women, shouldn't be seen as a gesture of doing them a favor. It should be understood that women hold up the other end of the sky, something to that effect. So practically, what he would then do policy-wise was that he ensured that female genital mutilation or excision was completely stopped. He stopped polygamy entirely. It was outlawed, right? He stopped forced marriages and kids getting married being young. And I think he spends a lot of his time thinking about the plight of women. A lot of his time, to an extent that, as I say, he was actually a feminist, not in ideology, not in thinking, but in actual practice, right? So perhaps let me go through this citation, which will probably be more eloquent and more apt to give you a better idea of what his thoughts were around the notion of women, and perhaps which might actually qualify him as a feminist, even though he didn't call himself that. So this is an extract from a chapter in this book, but the occasion at the time, it was actually I think it was in March 1984, so just a few months before March 1987, because he died in 87, October the 15th. Which is very important that we're talking about Sankara today, because we are celebrating 38 years since he died. So he got killed on 15th of October. Today it's the 10th of October, so we're just 5 days away from his commemoration of his killing. So the occasion where he was making this speech was at an International Women's Day rally, and he was addressing a group, I think thousands of women who had come. So he made a speech there. So I'm just gonna go through this extract, which I found very interesting, and I'm sure your viewers would certainly appreciate that and find it quite fascinating. So he says, our society, still too primitively agrarian, patriarchal, and polygamous, remember the polygamy issue, turns the woman into an object of exploitation for her labor power and of consumption for her biological reproductive capacity. How does a woman manage to live out this peculiar dual identity, which makes her the vital link that keeps the whole family together, the link whose presence and attention guarantees the family's fundamental unity, while at the same time guaranteeing she'll be marginalized and ignored? The woman leads a twofold existence indeed, the depth of her social ostracism being equaled only by her stoic endurance. To live in harmony with the society of men, to conform to men's demands, she resigns herself to a self-effacement that is demeaning. She sacrifices herself. And this is an interesting part, and I make a case in some of my writings that Sankara was actually a poet. He liked music, so I guess you'd find that fascinating, you being a poet as well, because he used to play guitar and the like. So I guess he was very musically gifted, and so this bit sounds very much like a proper poem from a proper poet, like you, right? So he then goes further on to say, woman, source of life, yet object. Mother, yet servile domestic. Nurturer, yet trophy. Exploited in the fields and at home, yet playing the role of a faceless, voiceless extra. The pivot, the link, yet in chains. Female shadow of the male shadow. If that is not poetry, then I don't know what poetry is. Very, very incisive, very powerful.
That is the female experience.
And you wonder how did he even think about these things? Him being a man in that era. So it shows you that he was miles ahead of his peers, miles and at that young age even. So he then goes on further to say, the woman is the pillar of family well-being, the midwife, washerwoman, cleaner, cook, errand runner, matron, farmer, healer, gardener, grinder, saleswoman, worker. She is labor power working with obsolete tools, putting in hundreds of thousands of hours for an appalling level of production. This is ridiculous. For someone that young, not having, I guess, physically experienced these things, but to think about them, to see them, I guess, in his people, it shows you that he worried a lot about the plight of women and the inequalities that persisted at the time and to this date. He then says our sisters, fighting as they are on the forefronts of our war against disease, hunger, poverty, and degeneracy, feel the pressure of changes over which they have no control. For every single one of the 800,000 males who emigrate, a woman takes on an additional load. The 2 million Burkinabe men who live outside the country thus exacerbate the imbalance in the sex ratio that puts women today at 51% of the total population, or 52% of the resident population that is potentially part of the workforce. So remember earlier I said that Burkina Faso was a very poor country. Nothing really strategic about it except being a labor reserve for bigger countries around itself, Ivory Coast, Senegal, and them. So at the time, the population was about 7 million. So this is in the 80s, 70s, 80s, right? So if there are 7 million people who live in a country and 2 million leave the country, it shows you, the veracity of the fact that people had to go somewhere to get remittances for those left at home. And lastly, as I'm about to conclude on this extract, he says, too busy to give. Remember, he's still explaining the plight of women, what he understands about women and their struggles. Too busy to give the necessary attention to her children, too exhausted to think of herself. The woman continues to slave away, wheel of fortune, wheel of friction, drive wheel, spare wheel, Ferris wheel, broken on the wheel and bullied. Women, our sisters and wives, pay for having created life. This is insane. These are insane punchlines, right? Socially relegated to third place after the man and the child. They pay for sustaining life. Here, too, a third world is arbitrarily held back to be dominated, to be exploited. Subjugated, the woman goes from a protective guardian who exploits her to one who dominates her and exploits her even more. She is first to work and last to rest. She is first to go for water and wood, first at the fire, yet last to quench her thirst. She may eat only if there's food left, and only after the man. She is the keystone of the family, carrying both family and society on her shoulders, in her hands, and in her belly. In return, she is paid with oppressive pro-birth ideology, food taboos and restrictions, overwork, malnutrition, dangerous pregnancies, depersonalization, and innumerable other evils that make maternal deaths one of the most intolerable, unspeakable, and shameful defects of our society. So it's as I said, when I was doing my PhD, as part of my methodology, I had a chapter actually that looked at Sankara and what his thoughts are about women, because he spends a lot of time speaking about women. And one of the approaches that I used was in reading a number of books on Sankara, but this is a collection of all his speeches. So I then read the entire book, and then I would mark every time he mentions the word woman, woman, female, girl, which are same cluster words, right? Or codes, as we call them, coding. So every time he mentioned that, I would cycle that and then calculate how many times he did that. It's a lot of times. So clearly he was worried about the plight and the plight of women in society. And in fact, he mentioned somewhere that there's no revolution without women, because they are the ones who keep the fires burning. And of course, as we well know, in this country, the epitome of that is Mama Winnie. So it's a classical example of the powerful role that women plays. And I wonder why he was so bothered about the condition of women, because he grew up in a household where he had both parents. But it's very interesting. Also, he got married very early. The wife who still lives now, Miriam Sankara, I think they got married when he was in his 21, early 20s, quite early. And of course, they stayed together until he died. So yeah.
How come we're not getting Sankara kind of men? Like when you look at the political situation in South Africa,
Right.
they would be appalled to have a female leader. I mean, for now, they say they're women leaders, but it's the patriarchy princesses that have been put in the positions. We don't really have the female leaders. The female leaders tend to be silenced and shut down. So what is it about the psyche here?
It's very interesting. As you rightly say, it's very entrenched. Even as I'm sure you're well aware, a few years back, the ANC Women's League said that we're not ready for women president. They're supposed to represent women, but they're saying maybe not yet.
They didn't support Winnie Mandela.
They didn't support Winnie.
Zuma's campaign.
Right. So it goes to show that unfortunately we are still very far in South Africa, because with this GBV scourge that we are going through, the rapes and all that, if we had this kind of thinking and leaders who are pushing this kind of narrative of Sankara, surely we would have fixed a lot of ills that have to do with GBV, right? And one wonders why we are not learning from because this is not ancient history. This is just yesterday, 1984, 83, 87. It's literally just yesterday. And Thabo Mbeki actually met Sankara for a number of times. So during that, remember, this is the mid-80s, just before they would come back from exile, the 1990 moment. So as you know, Mbeki was in UK, in Europe, and mobilizing support. He also spent some time in Burkina Faso, and at the time, Sankara, I don't know how they met. Sankara was in government, and it is said that Sankara told President Mbeki at the time that you'll one day be president of South Africa, so I'm preparing you for that. So when I go on my trips, you should come with, so that you start learning. So that is very unselfish. And I guess one can even say he was a prophet. How did he even know that Mbeki would be president?
And why didn't Mbeki know him then?
So yeah, that's a good one. And I actually was supposed to interview President Mbeki as part of my PhD thesis. He had in principle agreed initially. I had drafted a number of questions for him.
Yes.
And one of my colleagues and mentors then sent the questions to President Mbeki for him to have a look. And then we waited for the date for engagement, because I always wonder if you literally learned firsthand, if you traveled the world for that period with such a huge figure, why didn't you employ 5% of the things that Sankara did when you became president? Why didn't you try and implement some of the thinking, some of the policies and interventions that he did? So it's an interesting one. I hope we'll one day get an answer to that, but it's very worrisome. Clearly, we don't learn from our history, we don't learn from our forebears and our sages. And if we don't do that, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes.
What about the relationship between Sankara and Blaise Compaore, who we are still very angry at?
Compaore,
yeah.
Right? So the issue of Blaise Compaore, and a lot of people probably might not be aware, of course they know that he was Sankara's right-hand man, that he was actually the one who led the rebellion while Sankara was under house arrest.
Yes.
And he was one of the people that said Sankara should take the reins, right? But what is very fascinating about the whole thing is that Compaore grew in the same family as Sankara. So he would eat and sleep and be fed by Sankara's parents. And the siblings of Sankara, I think they were wept. They wept when we had this conversation about the fateful day, 15th of October 1987, when Sankara was declared dead. And they were there waiting for Compaore to come and explain what happened, because he was their son, literally. Because they fed him, he would sleep there. So he was their son, not even, he wasn't a friend. He saw them, they saw Compaore as their son. Months and weeks passed. Compaore didn't come to explain what happened to his brother, right? So that was probably, it's a probably classical definition of betrayal. I don't know what one might term that. So he never went to this day, because the parents long died. So Compaore, I think, like most close friends of our leaders. So, and this has happened throughout. So if you look at how Kwame Nkrumah died, how Lumumba died, how Cabral died, right? They were all betrayed by those closest to them. And I often worried, I would tell a lot of my friends and colleagues that I often worried about what would happen to Julius if he were to be president, because Floyd next to him I think we're going to have a replay of the Compaore Sankara phenomenon. Which is why when he left the EFF, I was actually relieved, because I knew how it was going to end ultimately.
Because greed, the spirit of greed would have...
It was definitely. So luckily it showed now he left for whatever reason, but I was glad it happened now, because had it happened while they were at the union buildings, we know how it was going to end, because we've seen that throughout African history. So it was going to go down exactly like that. He was going to sacrifice him at the altar of Euro America for the top seat. So,
yes.
As I was saying with Compaore, he of course got the order from France, the former colony. Belgium was involved.
So build it up for us, how
it got there.
Yes.
So of course the first 2 years or so he was very supportive of Sankara and the like, and then it happened that he got married to a daughter of I think one of the presidents at the time of Ivory Coast. I think it was Hofwe Boigny or something like that.
And that's where he's exiled to now, ne?
That's where he's exiled to now. So he went back home basically. Okay. So he got married to that lady, and soon after that he started changing. His thinking changed. He was more materialistic. He was driving bigger cars, and no one knew where he had gotten the monies. And he wasn't the same fighter who launched the revolution for Sankara and the people, right? To the point that after he killed Sankara in 87, immediately he then introduced what he called the rectification of the revolution, which was the undoing of everything that they did together with Sankara. And so they went from moving left to moving drastic right. Mm-hmm. And he termed that the rectification of the revolution. And he was arguing that Sankara was veering off the initial cause that they were charting. And then he went straight back to the IMF and the World Bank, and literally all the companies came back into the country. And remember that policy of the Renault 5, that was done away with. Immediately, there were Mercedes-Benzes and Porsches. He was now wearing suits. Remember, they were wearing camouflage military wear. Stop those things. So it seems to me that it was a matter of greed. He probably felt Sankara, because Sankara already, even at the time, he was making waves throughout the continent, throughout the world. And perhaps he was envious, and he thought, no, let's take this person out. So as I said, a number of countries were involved. It wasn't just France. So there was France, there was Belgium, and of course there was Ivory Coast, because Ivory Coast has always been, a lapdog of the West since independence to date. So it hasn't changed. And then, interestingly, which might be interesting perhaps for you and some of your audience, is that Muammar Gaddafi, the beloved Muammar Gaddafi, was involved in Sankara's death. Right? And the reason for that, yep, that's what most people don't know. And the reason for that, guess what the reason is why he had a vendetta against Sankara? because he had met Sankara a few times. And Sankara is quoted as saying after one of their meetings, or in fact during the meeting with Gadaffi, because Gadaffi wanted the Burkina revolution to be modeled after the Libyan revolution. Okay. And then Sankara said, we appreciate that you've been at this for some time. We see the things you're doing. We are inspired by what you're doing for our people. But our revolution doesn't necessarily have to be what you are doing here. And he famously said, we might be new into this thing, but we're not necessarily political virgins. We are going to forge our own revolution based on the need of Burkina Faso, not of Libya. And apparently Gadaffi was furious that Sankara didn't want to follow his model and do what he was doing in Libya. And perhaps, I think, he probably saw that the rise of Sankara was astonishing. Remember, he used to be the poster boy of Africa and was doing things, and essentially he was our president of the continent. He was running the AU. He was funding the AU. And he probably thought that this guy is going to outshine me very soon. So if he's going to be taken out, I'm going to contribute one way or the other. That's how he was involved in Sankara's death, our beloved Gadaffi. And I often say, and Professor Kwesi Kwapra writes a lot about pan-Arabism, what we term pan-Arabism, because he says that what Gadaffi was doing, contrary to what he was saying, he wasn't a pan-Africanist, he was a pan-Arabist. And what he wanted to do was to Arabize the rest of the continent. Remember, 1/3 of the continent, North Africa, is completely under their control. He wanted to Arabize Africa down south of the Sahel, so that he can then conquer the entire. And he has written documents, he's presented papers in the Arab League, where he's saying more Arabs need to come into Africa. That's the only space available for them, so that they can conquer Africa. So Gadaffi, unfortunately, and I hate to be a bearer of bad news, Gadaffi is not what people think he is, about him wanting the continent to unite, wanting us to be independent and all this stuff.
Arab.
Right? So the whole unification of Africa was so that he can then have a hold of the entire continent and then take charge of the entire continent. And that has been the mission of Arabs since Arab enslavement. Remember, the Arabs came into Africa way before white people came. They're the first ones who enslaved black Africans, which is why North Africa looks the way it does.
Yes.
Because Morocco and Libya and Tunisia, they were purple, blue, black, just like Nigeria and just like us here. There were no Arabs there. They came in, annihilated all the black people in North Africa. So essentially, Gadaffi wanted to do that down south.
Guys.
So it was. That's what I often say, that his killing by NATO and them was perhaps a blessing in disguise, because he was well on course, because he had captured completely the AU. He was funding the AU. So Sisindile, for real.
So back to Blaise. Now, so he starts changing, gets this new wife, and the wife starts whispering.
Yes.
And then the whites start entering his space, and then he starts changing. Then what happens?
So then what happens is...
Do him and Thomas ever have now it's uncomfortable between them, or he was completely blindsided?
He wasn't blindsided. Of course, with him, he'd act as if everything is fine, right? But he was given intelligence, guessed by who? The Cubans, under Fidel. The Cubans reached out to him and said, our intelligence tells us that Blaise wants to take you out. We are more than willing to help you. We can bring our special forces to at least ensure your safety. I don't know what you want to do about him, but they told him probably well over a year before he was finally killed. He knew that Blaise was coming for him. And then he says, well, Blaise is my brother, and if it's him that's coming from me, there's nothing much I can do. He can take me out any day, and I see myself as a person on a bicycle pedaling on an uphill. and I cannot stop now. The only way is just to keep pedaling, because if I stop, I'm going to fall and roll back. And I'm not going to arrest Compaore. I still see him as my brother. And if it's him who's going to kill me, it's already done. So he essentially refused the help from the Cubans, or even beefing up his security internally, which is why I said, beyond all the great things he did, obviously as a human being he had a number of blunders, because he wasn't security conscious at all, to the extent that I think every month or so, every Wednesday of every month, he would take a walk about in the streets and greet people, shake hands, without security or anything, and just shake hands and talk to people. And he should have been more aware that, in as much as majority of the people liked him, he would have stepped on a lot of people's toes. So the elites who were making loads of monies, the traditional leaders, for instance, didn't like him at all, because I think a year after he took government, he then expropriated the land, which were owned by the traditional leaders, the chiefs, to say, but you can't be benefiting from, because people used to pay taxes to those to the traditional leaders. They had a lot of benefits. They're not paying for water and electricity and all that. He then said, but in as much as you are our leaders, really there's nothing too special about you. You should like the rest of Burkina, work for your food. So he took away those benefits of electricity and freebies, basically, then took the land and then nationalized it and gave it to the people themselves directly. Then they worked the land. So since that time, the traditional leaders were very mad at him, and they never forgave him. So those were some of the pitfalls that perhaps he could have found a better way of dealing with the issue of traditional leaders. And so, yes, I guess we digress now. So we're still speaking about Blaise Compaore and whether there were signs that something was amiss. So indeed there were signs. Sankara was told that he's coming for him, and he completely did nothing about it. He said, well, if it's my brother's coming for me, I'm already dead, so be it.
And then what happens?
And then you mean after the intelligence?
How does it lead to the unaliving? What happens the day that they unalive him?
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
How does it lead? What are the events leading up?
Sure. So, he's in a cabinet meeting with his ministers. I got to visit the site where he actually died, which is now a memorial, a proper memorial.
I've seen pictures.
Right. So.
And how Blaise just did not maintain that space and just let it rot.
It was.
What is disgusting?
It was a mess. So my first day, my second day, I think, when I got to Burkina Faso, well, I got there in the morning or so. So the following day, I went to his cemetery, his supposed cemetery.
Yes.
So this was in 2017, and Compaore, I think, was deposed in 2014, isn't it? Thereabouts, when he was deposed. It must have been in 2014. So I went there just a few years after Sankara, Compaore had fled the country. So I went to the cemetery where Sankara was said to be buried. And I'm saying said to be buried because the way he was killed and hurriedly buried, people were not really sure if that was in fact his grave, right? So I went to the place, and at the time also there was no confirmed DNA tests of the bones, partly because they poured acid on his body after killing him. So they tried to.
Okay, we go back and tell what happens that day.
So Sankara is sitting in a cabinet meeting with his ministers. I think there were 14.
And don't use graphic language, please.
Right?
Yes.
All right. No, sure. No, definitely.
Okay.
So he's sitting there, and then he hears gunfires outside. And then I guess it clicked that the Cubans told me that he's coming for me. And then he tells everyone to, guys, just calm down. I'm going outside. I know they're here for me. So rather they take me out than take you guys out too.
Yes.
So he goes out and then walks to the door with his hands up. And then no conversation, and then they mowed his body with bullets. Right?
And Blaise that time?
Blaise is not at the scene. He's sent. So the people who did the actual pulling of the trigger were his unit, were soldiers directly after Blaise Compaore. So clearly, like, he didn't even try to hide it. So the soldiers that he sent, he wasn't there at the scene,
Yes.
were those clearly under Blaise Compaore, under his unit, under his control. So they mow Sankara, enter the building, and then mows everyone. So they didn't spare them. Sankara wanted to spare them, but they were not spared. So all 14 of them were mowed down. There was one survivor. What's his name? Fidel Towe. Is it Fidel Towe? No. It's not Fidel.
It's the one who used to be his guard, ne? His right.
No.
Okay,
So the guy who survived, who was a minister, I actually got to interview him and speak to him as well when I was there. He survived because he played dead. So they shot everyone in that room, and then he played dead. That's how he survived. And he lives to tell the story to this day of how he survived. So yes, that's how they were mowed down, and then of course later in the evening, then Sankara goes on radio and TV to announce that there's a new sheriff in town, and this is the direction the country was going to take.
Compaore, of course.
This is Blaise Compaore, yeah. So that's how it.
So how do the people react to the death of Thomas Sankara? What happens? Is
Right.
there mayhem?
This is I think another fascinating dimension, because you'd imagine, considering the things he was doing for the people,
Yes.
because among some of his interventions is that in less than 3 years the country went from being a net importer of food to being a net exporter of food. They went from having massive debt to having surplus in their fiscus, right? In that period when he was in government, so things were happening. Like there were a lot of clinics. He built schools, clinics, and the like, and you can see that to date, because when you move around Burkina Faso, almost every corner there's a clinic, and that's some of the legacies of Sankara. I think I forget now where I was. I was losing my.
I think we're wrapping up with what happens with Blaise.
Oh yeah, was there rebellion after?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the question.
So there was a bit of rebellion, but it was swiftly quelled. It wasn't much as you'd imagine, which is an interesting issue that I guess warrants further research, and because you'd assume that hell would break loose and people would say there's no way, especially the man in which Sankara was killed, and it was clear to everyone who killed him. So there was a bit of rebellion, but it was quelled. It wasn't too much. And some of the theories around why the dichotomy, why isn't it that people rose in numbers, is that one, it had only been 4 years of this new regime. People are slow to change. But also the institutions were not strong enough that they had built. Of course, beyond the fact that they knew that the new chap in town, the new chef, would mow them down with live bullets if need be. So it was probably a mixture of those, but it's still not quite clear. I also didn't get a good sense in my research as to, but why wasn't there a proper uprising after Sankara was killed? So that's what happened, and after that, of course, Sankara took over. Compaore took over. Merely mentioning the name of Sankara was taboo for the 27 years that he was in government. You couldn't mention the name Sankara or be seen wearing in the streets wearing his t-shirts. So he made sure that he tried to bury his memory and his legacy by all means for almost 3 decades, and unsuccessfully so, because clearly.
He will never be anything like.
So definitely.
So what happens how does he get kicked out?
The 2014 insurrection. So of course, which is another interesting, because Burkina Faso is known to be the civil society there is quite active. Like the people, the unions are very strong. They're very active in politics and in sort of shaping their narrative, to the extent that to date, Burkina Faso has witnessed 9 successful coups since 1960. So there were 9 successful coups and 10 failed attempts. So, you can call it the coup capital of the world, arguably. It's the most coup-prone country in Africa. So what then happens is that in almost that 30 years that he was in charge, of course, he was ruling with an iron fist. There was a lot of suppression. So people rebelled this time around because he wanted to extend his stay. They wanted to change the constitution. Already they were fed up with the 30 years, almost 27 years. So he wanted to change the constitution. And there was a famous journalist who was killed there called Nobet Zongo. And people, I guess, just felt there's no way. And the people who rebelled, the young people who rebelled, were kids in their early 20s who were not there, who didn't really witness Sankara necessarily. So they were not born yet when Sankara was in charge, but they had, from their parents, they were told stories, which is why I guess it's important, the storytelling thing of African people, because that's how we learn, that's how we keep the fires burning. So the very same kids who didn't know Sankara were the ones who actually toppled him. And during those protests, as you can imagine, they were fueled by the fire of Sankara. They wore defiantly. Remember, it was taboo to wear Sankara's t-shirts. They were chanting Sankara, they wore his stuff, and then they literally bent down the palace where Sankara was. They bent down Parliament. And then he was whisked away by the Secret Service or the Special Forces of France. And then they flew him to Côte d'Ivoire. Remember I said Côte d'Ivoire has always been the lapdog of Euro-America.
Clearly, actually, Blaise didn't unalive Sankara. France did.
Yeah, exactly. So the worst part is after he was in Burkina Faso, in Ivory Coast, this is Blaise Compaore. Guess what they do? They immediately give him citizenship so that he cannot be extradited. Remember, there was a new democratic government of Compaore. So they even give him citizenship. So it's very clear.
Yes.
So the battle lines were drawn. So he was given citizenship to avoid, because Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso don't have an extradition treaty.
Yes.
And so they said, well, to avoid you being dragged into this thing, we're going to make you our citizen so that they cannot touch you.
And he's still alive. He's
still alive, doing very well in Ivory Coast. And as you might know, he was formally charged for the murder of Sankara, and I think was given a death penalty or life imprisonment sanction. But of course, it was only theoretical and formal because they can't get to him. He's being shielded by both France and Ivory Coast.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that's
depressing.
That's very depressing.
So as we wrap up, what's the importance of Traoré then, as we look at this past? Because he rises from those ashes.
Yeah. Traoré is a fascinating character, and I'm hoping I'll go to Burkina Faso soon, hopefully sometime before end of this year for a conference, and I can spend time there and get to see on the ground. I saw Mama Litchfield Chashabalala was there. He actually met Ibrahim Traoré very fast. I watched that podcast on MOYA, so it was very fascinating. And actually reached out to Mama Kanyisile after I saw your podcast, because I'm currently busy with my book on Burkina Faso, Sankara, and Ibrahim Traoré. So the title of the book is Revolution Reimagined, an Afrocentric reading of Sankara's legacy leadership and Africa's coups resurgence. So in that book, I'm just trying to make sense of why is there this wave of coups in Africa. But remember, from 2019-20 with 2022 with Ibrahim Traoré when he took over. So I'm trying to make sense of that. Are these your typical coups that have been happening in Africa's independence? Is it a cycle, or these are not actually coups? These are revolutions actually, because with those coups, remember, the anti-France sentiment grew. The military camps were kicked out in most countries in West Africa, especially the three that formed the AES, so Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And apparently, they are actually moving very fast to eventually, unify the three countries to have them as one country. Already they are doing a lot of trade together. They want to create their own currency. So that to me says these were not just, selfish coups. These were revolutions actually. So Ibrahim Traoré, of course, comes into the picture in 2022. So in January there was a coup. I think it was Damiba, the guy who became president in January 2022. Fast forward, I think September, then Ibrahim Traoré topples. Mm-hmm. So there were two coups in 1 year, in a space of 6 months or so, in Burkina Faso.
This is their elections. Coups are their elections.
Right.
Okay, good.
So Traoré takes over from these pushists. And then, of course, as we know, he literally models his governance and leadership strategies completely based on Sankara.
Yes.
Right? Which is why, of course, a lot of people like him. His posture, his demeanor, his thinking, and how he behaves when he's around other leaders in the world. Of course, you saw that famous clip with him engaging Putin. So Traoré emerges, I guess, from the ashes of Sankara and resuscitates revolution, the August Revolution, to the extent that he literally saw that something drastic has to be done. In 1987, the Sankara revolution was cut short, and I think he literally took the baton and is running with it. And there's actually a chapter by Ernest Hutch, one of the foremost scholars. He's from America, who actually spoke with Sankara, interviewed him, wrote about him for decades, and thankfully he agreed to contribute a chapter in my book. It's an edited volume. So Ernest Hutch basically has a chapter in my book where he sort of makes sense of the Traoré moment, and to see whether in fact he is the Thomas Sankara reincarnate or not. And who better do that, because he actually said with Sankara, he interviewed Sankara numerous times. He's been writing about him. So I think he does a sterling job about giving us a good sense of what we're seeing. And as to whether it's sustainable or not. But I think, it's fascinating what's happening with Traoré. And I think he's definitely going to change, because remember, I still have contacts in Burkina Faso. So every time I'd call and say, but is this what we are seeing on TV, in the media? Is it true? What is happening on the ground? So certainly, it is what we are seeing in the media is indeed true. And I hear every single day there's a famous square not far from the palace where Traoré stays. People came there and sleep there every night because they're saying they want to guard their president. They know people want to take him out, so they want to guard the president themselves. So that's how deep, I guess, the connection is with Traoré and the people. And I guess they see Sankara in him. And so clearly they would have learned something about how Sankara was taken out, if they can literally sleep at night in the streets to say we are guarding our president, he's not going anywhere.
Thank you for such a beautiful episode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll call you again to come do another African hero and bring them to life. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think this is a powerful platform, and I wish you nothing but the best, and hopefully people can click, share, subscribe, as you guys know,
yes.
down below. So,
that's it.
Right.
In the comment section.
Exactly.
Liking, sharing, and subscribing. The members, thank you for your contributions every month. Guys, remember to watch the adverts till the end. I always can tell when you're not watching the adverts. See you again next time.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into it off. Buza MOYA so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.